Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining this talk. Good afternoon. Um, so we're gonna talk about my favorite topic, which is communities and the difference between Western and Global South communities. I think it's a heated, can be heated topic if you are on Twitter. But let us introduce ourselves while Femi also join us. My name is Renata Rodrigues. I work for Femi as a community head of community and marketing. But I've been working on Bitcoin already from 5 years. And the way I was orange pilled is a little bit different from the regular story of, a Bitcoiner, because I came from the regular situation as a marketeer. I joined a peer-to-peer company called Paxful in the very beginning. And in my first 2 weeks, we did a tour, 20 days tour to Colombia to talk with the VIP traders of Bitcoin, of Paxful. And the funny story was they orange pilled me in a way that when I talk with the regular Bitcoiner in the Western, it makes me laugh a little bit because these guys, their stories was basically, look, I used to be a Uber driver, I used to be a taxi driver, and I opened up a business where I top up phones for people through the peer-to-peer. And basically someone sends Bitcoin to me, I buy the Bitcoin, and then I say, give him the number, and he top up the phone. And funny story, after that, like few years after that, we got bit refill. So this guy was himself the bit refill for a lot of Latin Americans in that time. So I feel I'm very lucky on this sense, because the way I learn about Bitcoin is a very practical way. And the way I see Bitcoin is the same way as well. It's like I wake up every morning and I ask myself, is this the best solution to help people around the globe? If it is, I'm good to go. I'm going to defend this with my teeth, my hands, with everything. But if it's not, we need to ask why, right? So that's my introduction. I think it would be nice as well, Ben, if you can introduce yourself and your story around Bitcoin. Anyways, just by the way, I'm from Brazil, so that's why the accent, it's very different. But I already live a lot out of Brazil, so it's interesting to see these differences coming from this developing country or global south country. Now is more sophisticated to say this, and in comparison with the Western. But we're going to go deeper to that.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Ben van Hool. I'm with Gen3, a company which is known as the nation-state Bitcoin adoption company, but we're also a technology company now developing Aqua. I've been there for 1.5 years or so now, almost since the beginning, let's say, since Samson Mao started the company. But I have a long track record in Bitcoin. I was just sitting underneath a stone, being quiet, waiting for Bitcoin to go up. Like, that is what Europeans do. And I wanted to do more because I wanted to give sense to what we are doing with Bitcoin. So I had a talk with Samson before going into Gen3. I also, much like what you are doing, I want to build something which has an impact on people, which can improve people's lives. And that is why I joined actually Gen3 and why I've been pushing quite hard to release Aqua and hopefully more in the future. But that's me.
Amazing. Thank you. They started right there.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm late. I got hooked in some conversation. So my name is Femi. I'm Nigerian. How I got into Bitcoin. So I discovered Bitcoin very early, but had no clue what it was. Didn't see it as technology. And then 2 years ago, a group reached out to say, we are trying to start a program to train African Bitcoin developers. Can you recommend someone to run it for us? But I couldn't recommend someone to run something that I didn't understand. So I went to read about Bitcoin, and the more I read about it, the more I saw it from a different light, because then I started seeing it as technology. And then I said, what if I ran it for you? And the rest is history. So I currently I then used to run Kala, which was a company that trained African Bitcoin developers and got them into jobs in Bitcoin companies. And then last year, we got acquired by Bitrust, which is a foundation that was funded by Jack Dorsey and Jay-Z to get more Africans into open source Bitcoin development. And so we run programs that find existing engineers in Africa, train them about Bitcoin, introduce them to open source. But then we also deploy grants, so starter grants for them to explore where they want to work in Bitcoin, and then long-term support grants.
Yeah, I think let's go with the basics. And I think we introduced a little bit from your talk just recently. It was amazing because we can go straight to the grain. So for you guys, what is the difference and the similarities between Western and Global South communities? I can start with you, Femi.
Yeah. So if I speak broader to, and I can speak from Nigeria a lot because that's where I'm from, and I think Nigeria is up there in terms of Bitcoin and crypto adoption. I see a lot of people using Bitcoin. So Nigeria in the last 8 years has had, by our own standards, our worst ever central bank governor. Well, until he was kicked out last year, and maybe the world's worst central bank governor, literally, of all time. And he took some very extremely stupid decisions. But also they use the currency explicitly as a conduit for corruption. So in Nigeria for those years, there was a central bank rate for the currency to get the US dollars, and then there was a real rate on the market. And if you did get, and of course you had to come through the president or the central bank governor to get the dollar from the central bank. If you did get it, say if you get $1 million, before you leave the bank, you've already made $500,000 on that dollars without doing anything. All you did was get them to approve. And so for people who actually had legitimate use for foreign currency, maybe an importer that wants to buy stuff, pay suppliers abroad, get the funds down, or someone who's gotten admission in a university abroad needs to pay their fees, or a Nigerian who's decided to migrate. And we've also gone through a migration wave of Nigerians going to Canada and the US and the UK. And you sold everything you had in Nigeria. You have all this money, but you need money where you're going to start your life. You just could not get Forex. And so what we've seen in Nigeria recently, what probably accounts for close to 80% of the Bitcoin adoption in Nigeria at the moment, is people who have now shunned the banking system completely. And we have a shadow banking system in Nigeria right now, where all you do is you have these guys, they're your bankers or your exchange guys. You send them the local fiat. You tell them who you want the money to go to in China. You don't know what they do, but the money gets to China. And what they do is basically either go through Binance or go through some Telegram peer-to-peer group and get all that fiat into Bitcoin or USDT. Get it either to the guy directly in China if he accepts Bitcoin, or to one of their guys who is in China, who gets it there, converts it locally and transfers. So that accounts for a huge chunk of the volume. Of course, that whole system of converting that fiat to Bitcoin and then transfer involves a large network of players. Mm-hmm. So those are the peer-to-peer guys in Bitcoin who are doing lots of Bitcoin trading, who buy Bitcoin or do the exchange in Bitcoin in that way and then wait for the price to go up or down. So that accounts for a huge amount of the volume of Bitcoin that's going through that system. You also have a lot of, so Ponzi's are very big things in our part of the world. And people know that they hear that investing is how you actually grow your wealth. And so a lot of them are sucked into Ponzi's in the name of investment. So you found people who've used Bitcoin and crypto as a way to sucker people into investment. So there are lots of people who also think they're doing Bitcoin, but they're actually just being sucked into all kinds of Ponzi's. In some cases, they actually buy Bitcoin. In the rare case, some other case, they're buying other shitcoin, or nothing is bought and they've lost money. So, and that also accounts for a bit of the engagement. So you have people who are actually, they are professional Bitcoin trainers who train people. They say they train you how to become a trader in Bitcoin. Some people do it, make money. Some people do it and lose everything. And what that causes then is Bitcoin trauma. So the next time you mention Bitcoin, the last thing they want to hear, because as far as they're concerned, this thing is a scam. I lost a lot of money and I don't want to touch it.
And how you see the Western comparing to, even like we are talking about traders, right? How you see the trader in the Western?
So I see, again, if I use, and I know in my talk I mentioned Bitcoin Twitter, but if I use Bitcoin Twitter as the barometer, and I look at Bitcoin culture, I hear lots about stack sats and hodl, stay humble and stack sats. I see a lot of, you have all these extra funds in fiat, just convert it to Bitcoin. Buy a hardware wallet or a cold storage wallet and just dump it in there and don't touch it ever. And if they hear that you bought something with Bitcoin, it's almost like you've committed a cardinal sin. Just keep it there, because one day the price is going to the moon, and when it gets to the moon, you get the Lambo. Which I think is good at certain levels, but I think a lot of it is reinforcing a very individualistic culture, which is it's about me and myself. Whereas I think in our part of the world, we don't have, because we've not had social support systems, the family is usually it, or the community is usually it. And so for me, when I look at this thing, I see the potential of what it can be if we're approaching it from that communal standpoint. But I don't get enough of that, the communal thing, when I observe, and I can only observe when I observe Bitcoin adoption, at least from the point of view of the West.
Before going to you, Ben, it's really funny. I don't know if you guys remember, there is some point Chase in US said just if you have $100,000, you could buy Bitcoin at some point, right? And people started to getting crazy, text me like how I do peer-to-peer, where I go, they're like, oh, what's going on? And for me, it was a really interesting story, because peer-to-peer, and still today, for a long time, was like the marginalized sector of the Bitcoin, right? Oh, is that shady people? I don't know how they change that Bitcoin, how they buy that thing. And these guys were like, meanwhile, innovating, finding different ways to buy and sell this Bitcoin, battering to their governments, to their institutions, to their KYCs, everything. But for me, the background of this was speculate means you have extra money to invest, right? And is peer-to-peer living of this means you need to live this, you depend of this, you make your money of this. So you're lesser than myself, So then when I started seeing this story with Chase, I was like, oh, okay, the table is turning now, right? So it's an interesting perspective, because I'm seeing a lot of people now looking to some peer-to-peer platforms as like, wow, this is genius. And like hodler, or even no one's or Paxful, or, even Binance. And like as a genius strategy. although like for me, the biggest peer-to-peer ecosystem is still WhatsApp, Telegram. And the way they do this is a very interesting thing as well. It's based on trust. So you have like these open chats that everyone, it's like a wild world. But also you have the VIP ones that if you screw, you are kicked out and you lose your business. So then I come back to what you said, what is trusting your community, right? In the Western, it's really difficult to get this, how I can join this place without not having nobody verify me and say, I'm legit, you know? What is this logic? So Ben, would it be interesting to come with your perspective as well around this?
Yeah, well, at Gentry, actually, I mean, I'm located in Europe, but most of our team is located in Latin America. And my wife and I, we also have a nonprofit working with Africa. So I think I have quite a good view of all the different places. In Europe, it's actually becoming a sad story, I believe, because as you say, people can invest in Bitcoin. Now these days they will do it through an ETF. They have been launched. Now in Europe they exist for years already actually, but there was no volume. Now they will catch up. But it's only for the rich. You have to go through a questionnaire, and even if you're not rich, but you can't finish the questionnaire, you're not allowed to buy. So what's going to happen in Europe, people are going to buy Bitcoin just as an investment, and the rich are going to go richer. I mean, that's not what I wanted to see. Absolutely not. It's nice to be rich, probably, but I mean, that's not what Satoshi created Bitcoin for. The interesting part for me is to unbank the banked, to give people a chance to be engaged in an economy. And I mean, the first time I saw what was happening in El Salvador, you see like these people selling some stuff that they made on the street. Now, they only had cash. They could only sell to someone passing by. With Bitcoin, they can actually start a web shop and they can ship it worldwide and get a payment. So the engagement is much bigger. And I mean, that is also my interest, to bring something to people that can improve their lives. And yeah, I mean, Europe doesn't need that. We have all the payment systems that we want. Why would we need an extra means of payment if we already have 5 or 6? You don't need that. In Latin America, it's quite a different story, actually. Inflation is enormous there. I mean, can you imagine 150% inflation per year? Money lying on the street being even worth less than toilet paper, just lying there. So these people, they have been working all their lives, and now they see the wealth that they accumulated being lost. So they need to escape to some system. And yeah, their Bitcoin can help them a lot. But you need to be able to access it. You need to be able to get it from those communities and stuff. So yeah, I think if nobody's helping you, it's almost an impossible case to get there. We have some NGOs here learning about Bitcoin, but if they have to do this on their own, it's almost impossible to get started because it is a complex thing and you need someone helping you. So, I mean, whatever it is, like you guys, whoever is teaching something about Bitcoin, that's what we need. And we need it in emerging markets, I believe, Latin America, Africa. I mean, I can probably not say this, but I was asked to go to a Bitcoin conference in Dubai, and it is next week. It was kind of difficult for me to get there, but also, except for finding investors for our company, I don't know what I have to do there, because those people, they are buying Bitcoin just to play around. And that makes me sad, to be honest. So, yeah.
I found also very interesting because, I don't know if you noticed the same as well, Femi, because you live abroad as well. There is also always this discuss they and us, right? And then one day again, the banks we start to see the banks in the US suddenly, just shut down. And people are like, oh my God, I don't have control of my money as well. Like they, you know. Do you think in some point these different worlds gonna connect because of this? Something is gonna happen?
I think before the Bitcoin, before those worlds connect, I think there's actually a connection point of those two worlds at the moment. And that is those of us, and I say us because I live in Ireland, those of us who are from the global south living in the west. Because my father and my mother are in Nigeria, my siblings are in Nigeria, I have employees that work for me in Nigeria, and so I still have financial interactions with Nigeria. And at some point when the Central Bank of Nigeria were trying to get as much Forex as they could, they banned people like TransferWise, like Azimo, who actually made it possible that I could pay my euros and money arrives in a bank account in Nigeria instantly. And once they did that, then Bitcoin became the alternative for me. So Bitcoin is how I get money into the accounts in Nigeria to be able to then send remittance. And remittance is huge. Remittance to Africa from diaspora 2 years ago was estimated at $96 billion by the African Development Bank. At the moment, majority of that is still going through either the banks or Western Union or MoneyGram and co, and they're all collecting their own piece of the pound from the flesh. So that's one demographic. If you then look at also the amount of wars and internal displacement that's happened in some parts of Africa, like in Ethiopia with the Tigray, in Congo, in Somalia, there are huge chunks of refugees in different pockets of Africa. And a lot of those refugees depend on their relations who are outside for sustenance. The problem with being a refugee in a country is most times you arrived with nothing, meaning no documents, nothing to prove who you are as a human being, which means getting a bank account is impossible. And so that's an opportunity. At the moment, again, within those communities, they have middlemen that kind of manage those remittance flows. But again, with huge cost implications. Again, this is something that Bitcoin can play a role in. And I can't see her here, but Noble from Bitcoin Innovation Hub in Uganda is doing a lot of work with the Tigrayan refugee community in Uganda. Uganda actually has more refugees in it than any other country in the world because of their location, from South Sudan, from Congo, from Eritrea. They all somehow end up in Uganda. And so that's another area where I see that there's lots of possibilities and potential to leverage Bitcoin. And then if we go beyond just Bitcoin as a money, but then look at, again, what's happening with mining specific and how mining is adopted in the West versus how mining is adopted. In the West, mining is ginormous businesses, mostly VC-funded ginormous businesses that are buying bulk power from large state power systems or large private power plants, and then using that as a means to generate Bitcoin, mine Bitcoin, again, typically towards the goal of the investor. I saw some stats a few weeks ago that said that almost like there are three Bitcoin addresses that's connected to majority of the mining pools in the world. Because apparently there's some VC type entity somewhere that's actually giving mining pools float so that they can pay out miners in advance, and in exchange, the funds actually go first to that group, which is interesting because yes, it expands the scale of the mining networks, but it also creates a risk of some sort of decentralization, which I think is something that the Bitcoin community needs to be conscious of. Then when you compare that and contrast that to the kind of work that's happening with Gridless and Gamma in Africa, where we're looking at stranded energy and actually taking the mines, not huge mining operations like you find in the West, where you have almost millions of mines, but you have micro mines being actually taken to the source of the power. I think that's an interesting dynamic that we're only going to see more of. And I think if there's any risk that we've seen from the rise of shitcoins and the role of VCs in that whole story and the whole story of Web3, then surely we need to be conscious of that dynamic as far as mining is concerned in the Bitcoin space.
You wanna add?
Yeah, well, you don't have to be scared of mining in Europe because they want to ban it anyway, which is also stupid because you can use mining for the benefit of the further development of a country, for green energy, and so on and so on. Yeah, I mean, what can I add? We're also looking at these mining projects actually. The biggest challenges for Bitcoin, I'm sure, are not in Europe, not in the US, but in all the other markets. Things like you are building, making Bitcoin accessible, making Bitcoin easier to use, make it safer to use, not losing your funds. I think that's a job that we have and that we want to do and that you want to do for helping those people. Yeah.
I wanna, when you talk about mining, something that came to my mind is the innovation, right? How each area of we are talking, which region, see innovation. So I feel Global South, the innovation come from scarcity, right? You don't have the resource. I give you this bottle of water. You're gonna do a purse. You're gonna do a cart. You're gonna do whatever you do with this, right? And in the Western comes from the research of the overload information that you access of information that you have. And in this case, I really appreciate. I always say this to him, Nicholas from Galloy, because I think he understood that. And he said, you know what, I'm going to stay 6 months or 1 year in this village, and I'm going to understand what is the real need here and how we're going to innovate from their needs. I think this was a lesson, and I think some of the companies are trying to do this, but still what I'm seeing is like packaging this. Let's see if it works, So then you see Manchakura that's innovating from a need, right? And but it still is much isolated projects. So we need to meet again. We need the Nicholas going. We need Manchakura coming, right? How you see this in the builders side?
So I don't see Nicholas going.
Okay.
I see more cages springing up in the local places. And if I look at the example from the hackathon we did, in the first year we did the Build for Africa hackathon. So it was actually a global hackathon. It was the Legends of Lightning hackathon, and we had an Africa track. And there were 70 ideas submitted, about 70 ideas submitted in the hackathon, and only 8 ideas submitted in the Africa track. Because for lots of Africans, we're asking them 2 difficult questions at the same time. First one, we're asking them to provide a solution to a local problem. And then we're tying that solution to new technology called Bitcoin. And so it was 2 mental leaps that we're trying to get them to. They hadn't even understood enough about Bitcoin, talk less of understanding and being in that position where they feel I can actually provide a solution to a local problem. By the time we did the second year of the hackathon, which we ran as a standalone hackathon, we got 38 ideas submitted in, much better quality ideas. Because at this stage, we had a critical mass now that understood Bitcoin as technology. We also made sure that it wasn't just developers that were coming to think of these solutions. So in fact, we encouraged developers to form teams with people who were not necessarily technical, but who understood the dimension of the problems. So I think a human-centered approach that will start from the people who are local, who understand the technology, but who also understand the problem, and who have what's called, and there's a book about it, creative confidence, who have creative confidence to be able to say, this is a problem that I can prefer a solution to. So I think we need to create more of them, and which is the work that we're trying to do. We need to create more people who understand the context of their environment, but who understand Bitcoin enough as technology, that they're able to feel confident to think of new, interesting dimensions of how to use the technology to solve the problem. I don't think that solution is going to come from Westerners taking excursions to Africa for months and then seeing their own interpretation of what they think the problem is, and then creating solutions that they believe are solutions to that problem. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. And I think that bottom-up spread of new solutions. However, the other side to it is you need resources to go from hobby hackathon project to actual solution that's launched in the market that has become a viable business that is solving problems for people in an environment, and they are getting value from it, and the people who've created solution are getting value from it. And so there needs to be more fund that's actually going towards helping those kind of projects start. I've worked with startups for years. You need a variety of seed funds from $5,000 all the way through to a few $1 million. Again, my belief strongly is that we can't be working on the money of the future, and then money is a problem. So I believe that within the Bitcoin community, if we are working on money, the money that people are hodling, the Bitcoin that people are hodling in those cold storage wallets, are not adding value to the Bitcoin ecosystem. Portions of that money need to go to seeding this kind of solutions that can actually show the possibilities of Bitcoin and can scale. And the dimension of the problems that we can solve are massive. In the previous session, I talked about infinite ways for people to earn and infinite ways for people to spend. My thought for this year's hackathon is to focus on trying to seed solutions that help the average African earn Bitcoin using the skills that they already have. And I think there are many, many dimensions, many possibilities around that. Because you can't be getting Bitcoin just by buying it. If you do that, the people who have the most fiat dominate that world. And I think that's a scary prospect for Bitcoin.
And it's interesting too. Like I told you about it, but like when we ran like an AI hackathon, and was in San Francisco, judges there, and everyone was like checking their very high-end solution. And there was like these two guys from Kenya. They decided to do an AI bot on WhatsApp. And the guys, I noticed that they didn't get how they were innovating, because they don't get how hard it is for Africa to get data, how expensive is data. And then the guys, basically, they understood the market fit, their market way better than any developer on that room. Yes, it was very interesting to see the lack of understanding.
So I tell the developers at the hackathon, if you're suggesting a solution that any engineer in New York can come up with, then you're not really understanding the dimension of the problem that you're going after. Now, the flip side of that is the kind of solutions we will suggest may seem trivial or irrelevant. So when we were judging the last hackathon, one of our judges works with a Bitcoin VC in the US. And one of the interesting ideas that half of the judges who were Africans got were these guys who wanted to incentivize people to recycle by getting them to earn Bitcoin or sats every time they returned an item to recycle. And the Bitcoin VC's first reaction was, I don't see how this becomes $1 billion idea. And but you already have in supermarkets where people drop bottles and they get coins, and we're like, Dude, we don't have that in Africa. But the story I told him then was one of the first startups that we actually invested in the hub that I worked with, which was a startup that incentivized people in low income households in Nigeria to recycle. They had bicycles that were converted bicycles that had storage space at the back, and they'd cycle in and people sort their recyclables, and they give them points on their mobile phone, which they, at the end of the month, they can exchange for a case of Coke or a generator based on how much points you accumulate. But what because they realized that there was actually a gap. Apparently, majority of recyclers in Nigeria were operating at 50-60% capacity because we actually don't have a culture or a system of sorting your recyclables at source. So whereas in Europe, you have the recycle bin, the general bin, the organic bin. In Nigeria, you put everything together. They all end up in the landfill. Then you have these scavengers who go in the landfill trying to find what stuff you can recycle from the landfill. What these guys did, their entire business model was hinged on encouraging people in low-income households to sort their recyclables from source. This, for those people, was gold. Because what they do is they get all those plastic, they clean it up, and they sell it to the recyclers. And it's from what the recyclers pay them that they give the guys the items they give them for the points. How do we use that? And these guys are simply suggesting that same system, but instead of giving them points, you give them sats. But a VC from the US cannot understand that. And so we need people who are coming in to invest in those kind of solutions to come with a level of open-mindedness, to understand that the dynamics in this place is not necessarily the same as the dynamics where you're coming from. And the people that are preparing these solutions really understand those dynamics. And it pays, it makes sense to actually listen, understand where they're coming from, and understand the decisions that they're making as they're thinking through the solution they're building, and then supporting them too. Because that's how we show the utility of this thing.
So Ben, you said like you have a team in Latin America, right? So do you see, do you see key, if you want to be a global company, do you see like this is key to have people, actual people around the globe, not just repeating what you were saying to them, oh, look, you're going to sell this, but also bringing the feedback, bringing these inputs that Femi is saying to us?
Yeah, that's crucial if you want to do something. And in fact, coming back to the VCs, Gentry, we had a lot of difficulties with VCs when we were pitching the company because we were doing this nation state consulting. And VCs don't like consulting businesses because they don't scale and they don't make enough money. But in fact, for Gentry, it's not about the consulting business. We don't even make money from that. So for us, it's about having all contact with all the people in the field, because all those people, they contact us and they say, well, maybe Samson can talk to our president or can talk to this or that. But we got a bunch of people interacting with us and telling us about issues, about things that they want to solve. And that's probably way more important than the real nation state business. Because in all honesty, we have El Salvador and we will probably have a second nation following, but even we can't predict which one it will be and we don't know when it will be. But the fact that we have these communication lines and that we create so much noise around it and people see it, they get to us and they say, please come here. I went to Suriname, we talked with the president, we talked with the central bank, but we also got people contacting us saying, well, but we have a landfill here. Can we do something with it? And then it turned out that the landfill was not really a landfill, it was like just a pile of waste, and it's really difficult to collect the methane from that pile of waste. So you would almost have to create a hole in the ground, put it all in there, and then start Bitcoin mining from it. But we would never know if people do not tell us. So yeah, anything we do is related on feedback from people in the field, actually, really.
And in the same way, like I'm a huge fan of Nigerian music, and you guys can judge me, but Burna Boy once said, like, when everything is screwed, someone asking like him, why people now is using the bass of Nigerian music in your music, and all the pop music, and he said, like, you know what, when everything is screwed, you come back home, right? Are you seeing this happening right now in the market, overall market? Like suddenly a feeling that companies are awakening for the global south, and how you've been seeing this approach?
So I guess, so earlier on I was talking about, and I'm sure a lot of us saw the video of the guys that were testifying in the US Congress that said, I don't see any, there's no use case for Bitcoin except for money launderers and scammers, right? The truth is that aside from the investment thesis, the Bitcoin world has struggled to actually show the use cases of Bitcoin. And the only way to show the use cases is to go to the places where the use cases exist. El Salvador is used as an example, and El Salvador is great. But there's a level to where the world starts getting tired of hearing just El Salvador. And they want to see a variety of places and stories. And I think that's where the Global South comes in, both in terms of in creating and showing those stories, but also in actually writing and identifying and writing those stories. Because usually, again, the stories we get in Bitcoin follow a trend. When people are talking about one story, then you get 4 or 5 people repeat that same story. And there's a lot of copying and pasting too in the Bitcoin world. I think there's massive room for much more originality. And that originality will come from people for whom the problems that Bitcoin solves is not something that they can be tourists to, but something that is there every day. However, 2 things are necessary. One is for people to be able to change the lens with which they see problems. I tell the developers, my people, that we have something that the West doesn't have. And that is problems. Gigantic, monstrous-sized problems. And that problem, you see it as a problem if that's the lens that you're looking at. But if you figure out the way to see that problem as opportunity, we can come up with solutions that Bitcoin has never seen before to show the use case of Bitcoin. For me, so that for me, that first is that lens, the lens to be able to change the lens and see what we think is problem and then the boldness and the support to actually go after pursuing those opportunities. And that's also, again, where it can be hard. I've worked with startups, and I've seen the startup ecosystem in Nigeria and Africa grow. And in the early days of the startup ecosystem, everyone wanted to build the African name, add the name of a Silicon Valley product. So I want to be the African Netflix, the African Facebook. And almost every startup that decided to be the African this crashed and burnt. It took our people stopping to do copy and paste of models that have worked in the West, and starting to look at what are our own unique challenges and how do we recombine technology to tackle our own unique challenges in our own way. That we started seeing quality, really good, really rich solutions that came up out of our continent. And I think that's the same thing that we need to see in Bitcoin. I tell my engineers that, say I want to build a wallet. Please, we don't need another wallet. We don't need another. There are more problems to solve than wallets, because the default solution in Bitcoin is wallet or exchange. Every sector has them. In education, the default solution is a school management app or a learning platform like Coursera. in healthcare, the default solution is a hospital management solution, a patient solution. In Bitcoin, it's wallet or exchange. But for me, wallet or exchange, that default solution is evidence that you're not actually trying to understand the real problem you're trying to solve. And I think once we start doing that, we'll get more.
Okay. We are running almost out of time. I don't know if you want to add anything on the top of that. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe just something to end from my side. Even on the top level, on the top-down level, let's say the government, I think there is a huge opportunity for the Global South to benefit from Bitcoin, whereas Europe and the US are not benefiting. And I mean, there is an opportunity to gain a massive amount there. We're trying to explain that to presidents and politicians, but they have to understand it. I mean, they are being oppressed by the West, by the IMF, and Bitcoin can create an opportunity for them, but they need to understand. And if they do, I mean, they can have so much benefit from it.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah.
I think we need the African argument for those governments, and we need to be talking to them in the African argument. The challenge is if you explain it, if you use the Western argument, then they don't get it. And I'm seeing already evidence of them listening to the Western argument. Most of our countries are copy-pasting US regulations on digital assets. And they're using it to think about Bitcoin as a digital asset, which is the wrong way to look at this thing. Because the US's reason for regulating this is because this affects the US and the US dollars. African governments, the argument for them is completely different. But they also need to come with examples and context. And I think there's certain parts of this context and the examples that are nuanced. You need to be able to explain in their language for them to get it and for them to make the move. Because they would always get the counter argument from the IMF and the World Bank. And the IMF and the World Bank have planted people in most African governments. They're called technical advisors. Most times they work for the ministers. They work for the ministers, but they're actually paid by the IMF and the World Bank. And their goal in there is to make sure policies are aligned. And so as you're giving them the Bitcoin argument, those guys are giving them the counter argument. And so understanding power dynamics and being able to navigate it is really critical.
Thank you so much. I mean, it was amazing to have you two with the view of different places. But I think and I don't know if you guys feel the same, in the end of the day, as a Bitcoiners, there are like similarities between us, which is the desire to see a better world, right? And I think if we focus on this, we can see the others, yes. And then we can meet and make Bitcoin more complete to everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. Thank you.